Well, hello, and thank you for joining us on the Florida Aviation Network. It's good to have you back with us. We're broadcasting today live and in the clear from the 45th Annual Sun and Fun International Fly-In and Expo, Lakeland Linder International Airport in Lakeland, Florida. I'm Ron Timmermans, one of your many hosts for the Florida Aviation Network, and I'm so pleased that you joined us today. You've probably heard of the term rinse and repeat, meaning that you wash something up and then you reuse it. And that's what it is for today. We had early morning showers that gave us that rinse, and then the repeat is coming up now, where we're going to continue to have fun at Sun and Fun. If you're watching this on live TV, probably you haven't been able to be here. I hope you'll consider coming again next year. April of next year, Sun and Fun, be there. You'll be pleased that you did. And if you're watching this in an archived format, you've probably already been to Sun and Fun and you're enjoying yourself here, as thousands of other of your friends are doing today. We've had a tremendous, great number of guests that have been with us this week, submitting to interviews with us, and we've learned a lot about their background, their contributions to aviation, and their interest in all things aerospace. Today we have yet another very interesting guest. I wanted to present Lieutenant Colonel Mitch Walrod, by his flight name Opus, and he is the current operations officer for the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD. Mitch, thanks for coming. It's good to have you with us. It's good to have you with us. So NORAD, one of the many acronyms that we hear in government all the time. I'm sure it stands for something that you're about to tell us. And if you would brief us quickly on the mission of NORAD and some other interesting things that you wanted to share.
Thank you very much. NORAD stands for North American Aerospace Defense Command. It's one of our major combatant commands, and specifically for NORAD, which is headquartered in Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado Springs, which is where I'm from. We are the headquarters for all of basically aerospace warning and aerospace command. So that means if you date our command all the way back 61 years to when NORAD came into being, it had more of a Cold War type of connotation, and many movies that have been set in the mountain at Cheyenne Mountain. And basically we have radar systems and the ability to see over all of our horizons to the northeast and west and south, of course, against the Cold War type of threat. Now, since 9/11, our focus has changed considerably. We still maintain all of the abilities and doctrines that we had pre-9/11, but we are also a very inward-looking organization as well.
I see. So one of the threats then that was present when NORAD came into being, what was that, 1958, if I did the calculations correctly, was a threat from the Soviet or the Soviet bloc nations and missiles that would be incoming. So NORAD was going to be our first line of defense against incoming missiles or a threat of that like. And then so that has evolved through the years, I'm sure, that strengthened, and then as the Cold War basically ended and we won, if you will, then that threat, I'm sure, didn't go away completely, but at least it was lessened. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, yes. And we still maintain all of the capabilities to see and respond from any axis, such as over the North Pole. We just do much more now also.
I'm sure. So it's the much more that will be of particular current interest to us, and that has to do with an acronym that we refer to as TFR, Temporary Flight Restricted Areas. And I know you're heavily involved in that. As a matter of fact, you're the defense for our nation in the temporary flight restricted areas. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that whole process and system works, Mitch?
Yes, sir. Basically, NORAD does have the ability to manage and control all of our fighter alert sites that we have on status at all times, 24 hours a day, to respond to, let's say, a 9/11 type of incident. But really it comes down even more specifically, and the reason we come out to events like this is we also have a mandate to provide protection to the president and other key members of the political system at all times. And as the president travels around, especially as Floridians know very well, he comes to Mar-a-Lago a great deal at Palm Beach. And when that happens, there will be a TFR, a temporary flight restricted area, set up, and we have to defend that. And we never really know, normally if we have an incursion into one of those avoidance areas, it's usually out of really just ignorance. The person didn't know that the restriction existed, but we have to handle it in a worst case scenario every single time. So we come out and we like to get face to face with general aviators and just provide some forum, some education, tell some war stories, and help get the word out as far as possible so that we minimize those TFR incursions, which is good for safety and economics.
Indeed, hence Mitch's presence here today to help educate me as a pilot and you as a pilot how to deal with and look for and deal with temporary flight restricted areas. So Mitch, have those been around now just since President Trump took office, or have we had TFRs around presidential and major events like that for some time now?
For quite some time, especially after 9/11, basically we started building them up. TFRs are for a number of reasons. The presidential one is the most dynamic because travel can occur really with hours of notice if he goes to an emergency area perhaps. But we also support major sporting events depending on the size of the event. Take, for example, your football games down here in, I believe, Miami. You'll have TFRs there, but they don't have the same level of security requirements. So the TFR exists in its normal form. It's published by NOTAM. However, we don't protect those with an air patrol. We don't necessarily have manned fighters. Take that to a baseball all-star game or a Super Bowl type of event where you have massive numbers and a lot of dignitaries and VIPs. That may mandate that we do put a security zone over that with manned patrols, and we would manage those.
Now, when you say manned patrols, I suspect you're talking about a pilot in an aircraft.
That's correct.
Okay, good. And so I would imagine you have some procedure for intercepting general aviation aircraft should it inadvertently wander into one of these temporary flight restricted areas.
That's exactly right. Okay. We hope to teach and anticipate that the general aviator would do the appropriate pre-flight planning, which is what's going to allow him to learn about that TFR through the NOTAM system, and then of course good radio procedures. Every attempt will be made to contact them over the radio. However, ultimately, if we have to. Yes, sir?
And I see that we have some video showing right now for what an intercept procedure looks like. So that aircraft came up on me, if I were the one that inadvertently ran into the TFR, came up on my left side and did this maneuver.
That's
and
exactly
what
right.
is it that they're telling me to do now? I mean, after I have the startle effect, what should I do?
That wing rock, as depicted in the ICAO procedures, that wing rock always means that I need your compliance and I need you to follow me.
Okay.
So the wing rock says basically that I'm speaking to you. It'll always be on the left side, making that assumption that the pilot in control is going to be on the left side. And then that aircraft is always going to make a slight turn to indicate the direction that would be the safe direction and the compliant direction for the civilian aircraft or the incurring aircraft to follow.
Right.
Now, subsequent passes are a little bit more aggressive. I'm not sure if we'll be showing that, but if the first pass is not successful, then a second pass would have a wing rock, but then the fighter will also turn safely across the nose of the GA aircraft, usually below for safety purposes, and they could actually drop flares, which would get your attention day or night to increase the urgency of the situation.
I see. So after the startle effect, and if I didn't understand what to do the next, then the second pass, they would come around a little bit more aggressive and certainly get my attention. So I would imagine, Mitch, that all of these procedures are probably written down somewhere, and I as a pilot should be able to review those. Should I ever get intercepted, I should remember what to do.
That's exactly right. The FAR aim is going to be one place, and the ICAO manuals as well depict all of those intercept procedures, the requirements, and then what the actual signals mean, and the proper responses from the GA aircraft.
Very good. And for those of you who our pilots, of course, and wanted to get this information so that you'd have it with you in the cockpit. You can download the ICAO intercept procedures from your website. The easiest one to find it at is the FAAsafety.gov website, and if you're already a wings person, you know about that website and you can download the ICAO procedures for intercept. What I found useful is, not that I ever intend to use them, but if I ever should need to use them, inadvertently blundering into a TFR, I have them downloaded to my iPad. And so after the startle of finding an F-16 or an F-15 off my left wing, I will probably remember to go to my iPad and look for the rest of the procedures. And I will be compliant. I just want you to know that for sure, Mitch, but hopefully I'll never have to incur that. So that's great. That's great. So assuming I don't ever want to blunder into a TFR, what can I do as a pilot to make sure that I don't inadvertently run into a TFR? Is there something I could or should do?
We basically, as we're doing our forums and our discussions over in Hangar A, we boil it down to plan, talk, and squawk. Planning, of course, being just the due diligence to double check the NOTAMs. Fortunately, the electronic devices have made it very, very easy to display the TFRs. As long as you do your diligence to make sure you have the most updated software and that you are enabling the device to receive those particular safety zones. Probably the next thing on that is that TFRs can pop up quite suddenly. And so you do want to monitor it at all times and make sure that after you take off, if it's a longer flight, that one doesn't come up. Talking, basically, we advocate, now a military pilot, we're always IFR, but we advocate that you're always talking because no ATC controller out there is going to willingly let you wander in. So monitoring the appropriate frequencies guard and the appropriate sector frequency is going to be helpful.
Okay.
And then squawking, of course.
And squawking, of course, yeah. Discrete code makes sure that the ATC knows who you are as well as where you are, and that's good. So relative to planning, if I just wanted to find out for today's flight, for instance, where are the TFRs, or if there's a TFR in my flight path, is there a website I could go to directly, Mitch?
The FAA does a fantastic site with the FAA.notam.gov.
Okay, TFR.FAA.gov, great. And so I can find out, I can see graphically where the TFRs that day, the anticipated times of them, and the like. So this is all good. I should be able to plan my flight to avoid, or at least be aware of, TFRs that may be in and around my flight path, and do appropriate things like talk with ATC. And as Mitch mentions, that's one of the things that we can do as pilots. I always encourage students with whom I fly that to speak with ATC. They're paid by our tax dollars, and they're there to help us along with monitoring us relative to other traffic, but also to keep us from inadvertently running into a TFR that we may have not known about, or that one that just popped up. So Mitch, I wanted to ask you, so let's say you have to scramble a jet. I imagine there's a cost to that, to deal with someone who's blundered into a TFR. What does it cost me as a taxpayer each time you have to scramble one?
It's certainly hard to put an exact number, but it would be a fairly conservative number to say that if the fighters were not already airborne, if they were not planning to fly, it could easily be over $100,000 to launch those fighters when you start incurring all of the maintenance costs, all of the fuel costs, and all of the agencies and reporting that's involved. So it's very costly. It
is. So my mistake would not come without a penalty as to taxpayers' dollars. That's truly unfortunate. One, that we breached security, of course, but then also that we've wasted so many taxpayer dollars when it was probably an inadvertent penetration. So I would imagine in and around the Washington, D.C. area, where the president and vice president and the major players are most of the time, is that like a all-the-time TFR? What do you have in the Washington, D.C. area?
Yes, sir. You have the DC SFRA, Special Flight Rules Area. I apologize if I got the acronym right. I'll be honest, I don't fly much GA right now, so. But the DC area has a standing SFRA all the time, and when you're within 60 miles of the Reagan Airport, basically they do require specific training, online training and certification, and then they have very
unique procedures.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Very procedural coming in and out of that airspace because of all of the urgency of protecting the area.
Very good. So for those of you who may be planning a flight in and around the Washington, D.C. area, I would encourage you also to take the online training. Once again, from the FAAsafety.gov website, you can get the online training for the special flight rules. Again, I don't remember the acronym either for the DC area, but there's the DC area freeze and the special rules area around there. Taking the online training will give you a good understanding of what is required of you and what you can do and help you plan your flight. If you're flying into one of the outlying airports like Leesburg or Manassas or College Park, there are specific procedures for each of those airports and get you in and out of there safely without having an encounter with one of Mitch's people that might come flying at you. So that's great to know. So the presidential TFRs then, Mitch, you said they sometimes come up not unknown, but I mean unexpected with little notice.
They are normally published well in advance. I believe it's 48 hours when they start releasing the information. However, if he were to go to an area unexpectedly, as when he had the tornado damage down here, I believe in Alabama, those could pop up a bit more unexpectedly, but always within a few hours' notice. And again, the FAA sites will publish them real time.
Real time, and actually, I can get them real time in my in the cockpit, probably on my iPad. That's if right. I'm appropriately equipped with ADS-B or with ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot, or one of the many opportunities that we have for using our iPad in the cockpit. So I will actually see on the map the TFR that has been planned for that day, and I should be able to avoid it, or at least be talking with ATC and confirm what times it is active and whether I can go through it still talking with ATC, or if I need to be diverted around it. So it's pretty easy. We should not inadvertently interrupt a TFR or fly into a TFR. There's plenty of information available to us electronically, as well as talking with ATC audibly and the like. So these are all good things to do to avoid that and avoid a really unfortunate, unplanned encounter with the military and the FAA. Should we do this? Say more than once or maliciously, if that were ever to be the case, what are the consequences to pilots if they bust a TFR, Mitch? Do you recall?
Normally what we see, and kind of like a court system, legal balances, we do the execution of the actions to prevent the TFR incursion from continuing and getting basically the offending aircraft into a safe vector and away. That's really where we stop. We don't have anything to do with the process afterward. Depending on how quickly they were compliant and the specific circumstances, there will generally always be the phone call to the FAA. It could actually be to one of the sectors. It could follow up with law enforcement if we had indications that they were not being compliant, or it did not look like they actually were heeding our instructions at all. Perhaps we just escort them through the TFR. Those types of situations would definitely warrant law enforcement meeting them afterward, but we're specifically held from knowing exactly what the consequences are. We do know that certificates could be at jeopardy, and fines and privileges and suspensions are all on the table.
So I guess we could sum it up by saying, you don't want to do this, have an incursion into a TFR. One, it wastes resources, it's embarrassing, of course, and there are potential consequences that the FAA may take against you with certificate action. But mostly we need to be responsible pilots, being aware of planning our flight in and around TFRs, talking with ATC, and then of course receiving that unique squawk code so that we have ATC knowing who we are as well as where we are. This is all a good thing that we can do. And let's see, Mitch, if we're a flight instructor talking with our students, new students to aviation, or maybe even seasoned pilots, what should we emphasize to pilots that we give instruction to? The same things, planning, talking, and squawking?
The same thing. And me personally, I would say, one, the diligence of planning, but it seems to me that the reluctance tends to be in the talking and squawking part. We like to get into a groove and do what we do every other time, do what's familiar, and then that leads to complacency. But if you'll just be willing to make friends with that ATC controller, do good VFR flight following procedures, and break away the stigma of talking and filing, you really get a much better buffer of security and protection around you to keep you out of trouble on that day when things don't go just exactly like you planned, or if that TFR pops up rather quickly.
Okay. One last question I wanted to ask. Do we need to be on an IFR or a VFR flight plan, or can we merely be talking with ATC on flight following?
You can be with flight following.
Flight following.
You might want to have a plan to go around the TFR, but most of the people I speak to indicate that they have very, very good luck just carrying flight following through the 30-mile circle, not necessarily into the 10-mile freeze. But
Very, very good, very good. Well, Mitch, our time is up. It's been great talking with you, and I know I've learned a bit about TFRs, increased my knowledge, and I hope you have learned a little bit more about TFRs, the importance of them, the cost of incursions if we do that. My guest today has been Lieutenant Colonel Mitch Walrod, codename Opus. 23 years of service to our country in the Air Force and Reserves. Mitch, it was good talking with you. Now with NORAD and trying to educate the public in his role as current operations officer for NORAD, and tell us about TFRs so that we can remain clear of TFRs. My name is Ron Timmermans. I'm one of your hosts for the Florida Aviation Network. We are broadcasting live and in the clear from the 45th Annual Sun and Fun International Fly-In and Expo in Lakeland, Florida. It's been my pleasure to be with you, and I hope you will tune in again real soon for the next broadcast from the Florida Aviation Network.